Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Annette, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the privilege of being here. I wanted to just start out by saying that as a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes and working in a community health center in the urban Indian community of the Seattle area, it's just a big privilege to be able to be here to share information about our organization and kind of our approach to providing healthcare services. Today I was asked to speak about our Indigenous knowledge-informed systems of care. So as the Seattle Indian Health Board is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, this is something that has significant meaning for us to be able to think about the founders of this organization and their vision that American Indian people and Alaska Native people are able to live and lead healthy and successful lives. And the way that we do that is very much in consideration of our traditional and indigenous ways of knowing. So to begin, I just wanted to start out by talking about what is Indigenous knowledge-informed systems of care. So should I be moving the slides or? Okay. So as an organization, we are adept at advocating and providing services in a cultural way for our relatives. And we refer to those that we serve as relatives. And because we know that these are, everybody who comes in the door is mirrors, you know, somebody in our family, whether it's a sibling, a parent, a grandparent, a son or a daughter, nephew, or any of the positions that we hold dearly in our family. So as relatives, we specialize in serving our community members and families. So when we think about what Indigenous knowledge-informed systems of care is, we're looking at the skills and the services and the cultures. So this is on the next slide. And we're thinking about in terms of being grounded in traditional medicine. And traditional medicine is something that is held across the nation among tribes and tribal communities and urban Indian communities. But in terms of our skill capacity, we're always continuously increasing our knowledge base so that we can carry out our vision for serving our people. Service-wise, we are, as a community health organization, we are integrating services with the Western medical service provision as well as behavioral health. We want to provide services that reflect a holistic healthcare system that is based upon our Indigenous values, such as natives first. And as an urban Indian organization, this isn't to be exclusive. Rather, we're looking at how we can serve our people and always fine-tuning, you know, the way that we serve people, all people in the Native way, with respect, quality, service, humor in the workplace. We have a set of values that we're always focused on in the way that we serve people. And we're recognizing that we as a organization, we have a culture of our own. Um, our culture is very diverse, both in those that we serve and among our workforce. We're always looking at, the different subcultures too, whether they be the LGBTQ2S communities, the elder community, the youth community, the immigrant community. Because while we're serving primarily American Indian and Alaska Natives, we're also serving relatives from other ethnicities, African American, Asian, Hispanic. So we want to make sure that we're covering the needs of our relatives, no matter where they come from. And we're always trying to learn more about how to do this in a good way. Next slide, please. So our leader is Esther Lucero, who's from the Dene Nation. And she has this quote that talks about really essentially that we as Indigenous people know what our communities want, and our communities really tell us how to serve them in the best way, in the most effective way. And so everything that we're doing is a reflection of what our community is asking for and what their needs are. Next slide, please. So when we think about what traditional medicine is, that's a huge question for any community. And we were wanting to be really thoughtful about how we define this for our organization. Next slide, please. We wanted to think about how diverse we are as an urban Indian health organization, and understanding that many of our relatives are coming to us from various regions across the nation, various tribal communities, and we have over 60% of our relative population that we serve identifying as American Indian and Alaska Native, and probably representing over 200 different tribal affiliations. So we are a very tribally diverse organization, including our staff, our workforce, who 50% of them identify as American Indian and or Alaska Native. So the next slide is discussing, what our definition is. Traditional medicine, you can ask any individual and they will have a unique definition that they've, from their understanding of what it is. So we wanted to, as an organization, have a collective definition that represents the perspectives of all involved in our organization. So from our workforce, this definition was drafted and vetted really by our workforce, our board of directors, our youth and elders councils, and the community at large through a community forum process that our CEO conducts with our community. So they put together and had input and developed this definition for us. It's grounded in Indigenous knowledge and various worldviews, and it speaks to our livelihood and approach to health and well-being, which relies upon the healing practices that are based upon the ancestral knowledge which requires us to attend to the mind, body, and spirit in all aspects of our lives. Next slide, please. So we wanted to talk about the terminology that we use regarding traditional health, traditional medicine, and traditional Indian medicine. So traditional health is our department that is within the Seattle Indian Health Board, which oversees the protocols, procedures, integration, and execution of traditional medicine at the organization. So protocols may be something like, putting in place a way to have a daily cleansing of our facility. So we do that twice a day, and that is a protocol that we've established. Our traditional health apprentice goes through the building in the morning and in the evening, and cleanses the building with herbal medicine. You may be familiar with sage, but that is one of the medicines that we use. And with the understanding that that medicine is bringing in goodness and removing anything that needs to be, any kind of negativity or anything that needs to be removed from our space. Procedural wise, we look at how we provide services. So we do have a process of, a point of entry for folks that are looking for traditional Indian medicine services, and how we work and collaborate with other providers from medical and behavioral health. So that is part of our integration process as well. And we are developing that as we move along into this full integration, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. The execution of traditional medicine is how we sit with our relatives, how we, what service we actually provide for them when we're sitting with them. And the way that we provide that, experience, and always thinking about on the back of our minds that, as a tribally diverse organization, that, we want to do the work that is going to be helpful for the individual and provide the services that will, that the individual actually sees as being of benefit to them. Next slide, please. So traditional Indian medicine is the actual practice and services. And we do have, we kind of model after behavioral health in terms of looking at how we're documenting or how we're noting the work that we do in traditional medicine. And so one of the things that when we're thinking about this, we always think about sustainability and how that can, what we need to do and what we need to put in place to get us in a position that we're seen as a viable service by others that may not have seen us that way before. For example, insurance providers. But we provide our services and with the understanding that traditional medicine is informing everything that we do. And the next slide is going to show kind of our model, model that we look at across the organization. And you will see Health and Human Services, but you will also see the three other areas that I won't expand upon too much here because we're focused on how we actually provide the service and conduct care coordination. But you'll see workforce development and epidemiology research and evaluation, and that mainly has to do with the Urban Indian Health Institute and the work that they're doing under the umbrella of the Seattle Indian Health Board that takes into consideration the traditional medicine values and aspect of conducting research and evaluation. And then we have the policy and advocacy piece of the work that our governmental affairs division does with the local, state, and at the national level to advocate for the needs of urban Indians and really all American Indians and Alaska Natives, because even with the understanding that most Native people live in the urban or off reservation, we're all in this and in partnership together. So the next slide is going to show how the components of traditional medicine. So we have established a practitioners network, which is continuously developing. And one thing that I would like to say about traditional practitioners is that it's really important to have a process to be able to vet our practitioners and to be able to have a streamlined approach in having them provide services for our relatives. We have a small staff size in our traditional medicine team. So of course we need to have add more folks from different regions, from different areas that can provide their perspectives on healing and wellness for our people. So we're continuously keeping an eye out for those that we can contract with and bring into our organization to serve our people. We're educating our workforce, and one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that everybody understands what traditional medicine is, what our definition is, some of the practices that we carry within our organization and provide to our relatives. So we've been doing this through what we call learning circles, and we've been conducting this training at all staff in services and through our learning process and coaching process. We also provide community education and cultural gatherings. So we have in the midst of the pandemic, we've kind of downsized or postponed a lot of in-person activities, but we are trying to adapt to other ways, such as this. We had a traditional plant medicine class that started, and then we had to move it into the virtual realm. So now we'll be offering that class online for our relatives. But we're always looking at, the experience of sharing, whether it's seasonal feasts or learning about drumming and singing, or learning about just kind of the sharing process through talking circles or other ways. We do have a traditional health apprenticeship and mentorship so that we can get our folks who are new and have a desire to serve our community in this way, on a path so that they can do these things here in this community. It's a little bit different than it would be probably back home, but we're trying to do our best here. And so it's really important for us to be able to rely on other folks like our practitioners from other regions to help us in these efforts. And then we have assessments and cultural consults that we would provide for our relatives, and then working in consultation with other providers. So next slide. So in a nutshell, I'll talk a little bit about how traditional medicine is being implemented in our organization. Next slide. This is the way that we configure our service deliveries. We have our assessment, which is focused on we've taken the medicine wheel concept. And if anybody Googles medicine wheel, you'll see an array of images and explanations. But really, this model is pretty universal, especially in healthcare settings or community health settings. When we're looking at what we mean when we're focused on the mind, body, and spirit. So the medicine wheel will show that we have the physical, the emotional, the social, and the spiritual areas of life. And so we will, when we're initially meeting with somebody to find out what is it that will be helpful for them, we do focus a lot on the spiritual aspect, because in traditional medicine, that is kind of the area that is probably the grounding of this whole type of service. The consultations, we're in the process of really developing them in a effective and an efficient way, because right now we as traditional medicine staff, we don't have access to the electronic health records of our relatives. We are working towards that. So we don't always know if somebody who we are visiting with has been seen by a medical or behavioral health provider. That will change in the future, because eventually we will be part of that system in providing notes into the EHR, and so that we can then streamline our care more efficiently and effectively. We provide these individual and group services, and I wanted to stress that most of the people that we're focusing on in our service are focused on cultural and spiritual guidance, cultural and spiritual knowledge. They want they want an experience and some information. They want a process for how they can heal, and include cultural and traditional practices in their lives. So that's mainly what we're offering through our service. And then, as mentioned earlier, community education is something that we're providing at the broader level. Next slide. Yeah, so this is an image. I don't know what happened. It was the example of our assessment, our actual assessment. So it's not really coming through here very well, but it just kind of breaks down that we're looking at how a relative can formulate some goals, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual goals for themselves. And then focusing on their strengths as a human being, what they bring to the table, so to speak, what's in their toolkit, because as a Native organization, we're always focused on taking a strengths-based approach. We know that our relatives are very resilient, that there's long histories of trauma and intergenerational challenges that have happened um, in their families. And so we want to really hone in on what is it that makes them feel strong, what will make them feel stronger as a human being, and on their healing path. And then opportunities. So figuring out with them what opportunities are here, what are some resources, what are opportunities that they can partake in, that they can build upon for themselves in their health and well-being. Next slide, please. So we have some goals as an organization to fully integrate traditional Indian medicine services. And that is a huge goal for us because at one point there was little knowledge that among our workforce about what traditional medicine is. And so to get us into a position to have our workforce understand what it is and what integration means is a huge success. Next slide, please. So this is what integration looks like based on our Indigenous informed systems of care. And we have our relative in the middle of the center, along with traditional medicine. And we have all of these services that this relative has access to in our home. And so, you know, we want to make sure that we are able to be well connected with each other in across our organization so that we can provide these services in a seamless way. Next slide, please. So this is our ideal vision for care teams. And if our chief medical officer were here, she could explain this in much more detail. But when we as an organization began our integration journey, we saw that there were a lot of silos, and we saw that I think we referred to it as the octopus, where one arm is not connected, or it's connected in some way, but one arm is doing one thing and the other arm is doing another thing. So we wanted to have all of our providers be able to even spatially move, be in a space where they could, where it was more so they could communicate at a higher level and more efficiently and effectively with each other. But here you see that we have a traditional Indian medicine apprentice as part of this core care team. And as part of our specialty consultation, we have our practitioners included in that circle as well. Next slide. So this is an image of just kind of where we're going as an organization. We have our core care teams established. We do have a traditional health apprentice on the floor every day. And we do have traditional health practitioners who currently are available via phone or online, so that sessions can be conducted with them. And so eventually we want to expand and be able to have our practitioners on a ongoing regular basis at our clinic. And so that's one of our goals for the future. It's a long process, and it seems like a long process, but it's really been happening within the last couple of years that we've been really moving in this direction. And there's been a lot of things to put into place, whether it's getting all of our, shifting the culture in our organization, and so that everybody is on the same page and is promoting each other, whether it's traditional medicine, behavioral health, and medical services. So that's in a nutshell kind of where we are as an organization and what Indigenous knowledge-informed systems of care looks like to us at this point. I think that's all of my slides. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Annette, for educating us on the components of traditional medicine. Your work is definitely a model for other organizations, both tribal and non-tribal, to look at to incorporate the additional component of spirituality into their holistic practices. So again, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Annette? Okay, we will, if you do come, if you do have some questions, we can definitely, if you do have questions for Annette, we can answer those at the end of Shauna's presentation. So we will go ahead and get started with her presentation. And Annette, again, thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending, and thank you for the awesome presentation, Annette. So as soon as we get the slides up, we'll get going. So what we really wanted to demonstrate today was how we integrate traditional Indian medicines into our behavioral health services, and how we cultivate Indigenous informed care here at Seattle Indian Health Board. So we do a lot of work around what that looks like clinically. So there is a lot of training. We have practitioners that come from various ethnic groups and various backgrounds. And so there is a lot of training and investment that goes into our staff and to onboarding them into our philosophy of care. Next slide, please. And this is, and Annette reviewed these, so I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And then the next slide. And so creating a trauma-informed care system that is influenced by Indigenous psychology. So really looking at models within our Western training and incorporating them, identifying ones that utilize our collectivist approach in our practices to heal the wounded spirit. So we do a lot, and I'll explain this as we go on, but our goal is to really provide services that are conducive so our people can heal when they walk through the door, creating a space that feels familiar, that they can identify as part of their belonging to a collectivist culture at a larger scale. So building a healthier tomorrow for our people is our overall goal. Next slide. And so how do we cultivate that in a behavioral health system when we come from different backgrounds, we come from different upbringings, we come from different experiences? And so part of that is creating a sense of safety. So, Esther Lucero is really strong on creating that system of care. Annette is very strong and focused on how do we create an atmosphere where our people enter our facility and they recognize that this is a facility that belongs to Indigenous people, and that this is there's a sense of belonging once you enter the door. So we cultivate that through visual representation of our ancestors, of our people who have struggled to get us to where we're at today with everything that's happened in relation to our backgrounds and our history here in the United States. So cultivating that in a way where visually they can recognize that this is a place where we recognize our struggles and our to get to where we are today. Another example, and I hear this all the time as I practice directly, is a sense of safety and grounding. Annette mentioned that twice a day. We engage in purification practices, cleansing practices of the entire facility. So often our clients come in and they're very welcomed by just that sense of smell, that grounds them and connects them to our Indigenous practices, and makes them feel safe and makes them feel welcome and makes them feel like this is their home. And we have a lot of clients who come here daily that are in behavioral health, and they actually call this their home. So now that social distancing and we're utilizing masks, we're starting to see more relatives arrive. And this is a place of safety, create that environment for our population. We have a large population of homeless Native Americans who reside in the Seattle area. So providing that sense of safety and security is one of our #1 goals. So that's an example of the scent of sage and how that works and resonates with our histories and our upbringings and those types of things. So in regards to traditional practitioners, we often utilize them in our therapy sessions. So to provide an example of what that would look like, we have counselor of the day. And so oftentimes there's been times where I've worked remotely and we've had an individual who has had active psychosis who was in the building. How do we navigate this individual, getting calls, calling clinical supervisors, but really we had to pull in traditional Indian medicine in order to work with this relative, in order to smudge the relative down, in order to cleanse the relative, a practice that the relative actually believes in, a practice that grounds the relative. And what happened in this case after intervention of trying to redirect this relative, trying to get him the assistance he needed, was TIM came in, worked with him, smudged him down, and he took a nap. And then we were able to ground him and transition him into a hospital bed. But those are the kind of techniques that, people have to walk through your doors and they have to believe in the services they're receiving in order for it to be helpful. And we've been so sterile for so many years working from a Western approach that we're ineffective with our First Nation people and the way we operate and the way we provide services. So, of course, upon receiving verbal and written consent, we will pull traditional practitioners into our therapy room so they can often ground our clients with the same practices that are similar. And so they can get in a space where they're centered and we can actually do some work in the therapy room. Okay, was there a question? Okay, so in order for us to care and be effective with our relatives, right, and they teach us this Westernly, that individuals walking through our door have to believe in the services they're receiving. And if they don't believe in those services, it takes a long time to get to in a space where they feel confident and comfortable with their providers, into a space where they can let their guard down and actually do some work. Next slide. And so we really work on creating, what does that dynamic look like so we can address both substance use and we can address mental health issues. And we recognize that trauma is the leading cause for our addiction, is the leading cause for other process addictions. And these are coping mechanisms that our people engage in efforts to survive and navigate the world in which they exist. So next slide. So creating a culturally sensitive environment. So again, right? So we cultivate that environment not only with our relatives, but with our staff. And so not only is the building cleansed and purified, every morning, you know, our traditional apprentice comes to our offices and she offers to cleanse us down. And this practice, not only for the Native providers, but also for the non-natives, is a grounding practice that gets us prepared and centered for the day. And this is also offered at the end of the day when we've been sitting with heaviness in the therapy room, we've been sitting with anxiety, we've been sitting with depression, and what that looks like to lift that from your physical being. So not only do we, you know, promote self-care in those kind of ways in regards to what our practitioners do to enhance their spiritual being, but also offering that from a collectivist approach while practitioners are on site. And so one of the things that we do here at Seattle Indian Health Board, if we are Native practitioners, and so I'm part Native and part Swedish, born and raised on the Klamath Yehuskin recognized reservation boundaries, raised by my mother, who's a Klamath tribal member. So I identify internally as Native American, even though my presentation, I'm clearly part Native and part Caucasian, but I identify with both. But my internal being, right? And so I believe in these practices. I believe in these things that are offered to me. So they're very healing and very grounded in the way I navigate the world. And so even though I bring, and I've been doing this work for years where I use purification and cleansing in direct practice here at Seattle Indian Health Board, so we can ensure that things don't go in different directions, that Seattle Indian, our cultural competency work group, in our theory here, in our philosophy here, we have to be vetted through our traditional Indian medicines in order to integrate that practice into our direct practice care. And so that's something we do under Annette supervision, under TIM supervision, and Annette has to vet these departments into if we're able to utilize and integrate that into our direct practice and care. But until that point, we're able to call upon our traditional practitioners to support us in that role. Next slide. So we can, Annette pretty much covered the theory of change. We can just go to the next slide, Tempest. So how do we orient our staff if our staff comes from diverse backgrounds, diverse ethnicities, right? We have to find ways for them to come on board, but it has to be welcoming ways, but then really orient them to the population they serve, or they may be reactive to presenting behaviors. We have clients, and I call this walking trauma, where they've endured so much trauma, they come into our clinics, into our systems, and they demonstrate very erratic behaviors, offensive behaviors. And training the staff on how does this develop? What does this look like for the people that we're serving? So we have, clinically, we train our staff on historical trauma. We also have a cohort of students that come from UW, a training program. And we also orient the training students to trauma-informed care. We actively recruit. We're a competitive site. So this year we were able to secure 3 First Nation, 3 Native Americans for these training positions to grow our clinical team. 2 of the natives come from reservations. So they're familiar with a lot of the historical trauma and things that people endure and encounter on a daily basis, and familiar with internalized oppression and what that looks like and how could we work with that clinically so our people get in a position where they know their strengths, they know that they're gifted and smart and they're able to succeed. So we do a series on historical trauma, clinical series trainings, and these consist of major atrocities that have happened over time to our people, and how that generational piece exists. And in this historical trauma training, we also include present day genocides that are done in more covert ways, but still exist. And what does that look like for our people? And how do they navigate a system that's not trustworthy? And so, and then we also do trainings, ongoing trainings, and we have, currently right now, we have 4 Native practitioners, and our other practitioners are awesome, and their intentions are beautiful, and they come to us in a very good way and wanting to learn more about Indigenous people and Indigenous psychology and what our practices look like when we fully integrate. So one of the things we do too, because we're all influenced by our upbringing, our backgrounds, and our own histories, is we have ongoing clinical trainings surrounding privilege. And what does privilege look like from both a conscious and unconscious level? Prejudice, racism, white fragility, and transference and countertransference in the therapy room. And this is done so we can, as a collectivist approach, bring our line sights not only just to our non-Native practitioners, but also to our Native practitioners about what we bring into that space and what we bring to cultivate team, and know that our vision and our mission and our goals are for the people as a collectivist team, regardless of our ethnicity. But it's very important to bring that in, otherwise things can happen, things can rupture relationships, because we are such an Indigenous influenced model. And then we have practitioners who are very Westernly trained, and it creates a challenge of what's ethical, what's not ethical, can we do these things? And we navigate that in balance, and really educate our practitioners on, you know, it's okay to call our relatives a relative. It's okay to tell our relatives we care about them. It's okay to make disclosures about who we are as people. And so we really work with more contemporary theory, and we'll go over that in a little bit. So ongoing leadership, right? We have leadership trainings from Esther Lazaro and Annette at the DLT level in regards to delivery of service, in regards to expectation of behavior, and then also at the clinical supervisor level. How do we navigate our staff and create an environment of trust and safety? And the expectation is, of course, lead by example. Next slide. Okay. So these are kind of things that, you know, constantly provided constant training. So we went over historical trauma. And how does historical trauma manifest in our presenting behaviors as a people, and often manifest with suicidal ideation, high rates of hopelessness, high rates of successful suicides. And when I say successful, I'm meaning that, and successful is generally used in a positive way, but clinically, because we have such high rates of opioid overdose and reviving individuals, we quantify data differently. So I wanted to explain that term because that's actually came up before in one of my presentations. And so the behaviors and conditions that manifest from unresolved historical and present day traumas should not be surprising to those in the field of clinical psychology, as many studies of intergenerational trauma, chronic trauma, abuse, and ongoing neglect exist. And then it impacts our psychological development. Neurochemical, psychological, cultural determinants interact with how we mediate post-traumatic stress and responses. We have individuals who come into our clinic, like I said earlier, who demonstrate very erratic behavior. We have staff who are untrained clinically, are untrained in historical trauma and present day trauma, and how that is disseminated, how that manifests in the way our clients present. So often we have providers that are reactive to the situation without an understanding or inability at that moment or time to conceptualize the client through their history and through their life experiences. And so often personalizing that exchange. So we do a lot of training around that because we definitely want to support our relatives and our staffs in a way that creates a healthier atmosphere for all. So one thing and why we do the trainings on privileges, racism, white fragility is because we grow up and we're conditioned within systems and environments. We often hear people say, I'm not racist, or I'm not prejudiced, or, you know, I don't see color, and we all see color. We all have racism. We all have prejudice. Whether we consciously can admit that or we can't. So we really do training around what does unconscious racism look like? What does unconscious privilege look like? So we can ensure that we attempt to become aware of our own privileges, our own racism, and our own prejudice. So that's an important piece. I apologize. I have to exit out of this screen. Okay. I apologize for that. People keep dinging me even though I sent out a notice. And so most often clinicians continue to work with our relatives and conceptualize the case through a narrow lens. And when I say a narrow lens, an individualistic lens, because, and that's a natural thing to do, we impose what we've learned, or we impose our background onto the people we serve, and we tend to conceptualize the case from that perspective. So trainings are essential, trainings are valuable. Otherwise, we're not going to get very far with our relatives that we're serving. Next slide. So we also, on our clinical series training, provide continuous trainings on systematic oppression. And if we come into a place where we've navigated the world with privilege, we're often unaware of what others experience and how they experience the world, or what they have to face on a daily basis. Lateral oppression. We do a lot of training on lateral oppression, and it's very important and it's very paramount, because if you come from, for our Native providers or other underserved populations or oppressed populations, if you come from oppressed populations and often feel you have no voice to advocate for your own needs or advocate for your own change out of a fear of retaliatory behaviors from whoever is your oppressors, right? That has to go somewhere. Like, that energy has to go somewhere. And so the anger and the hurt and the resentment has to go somewhere. So oftentimes when we, lateral oppression is, we often will disseminate that laterally. And so domestic violence, those kind of things that are happening within our tribal systems, tribal agencies, where we tend to focus more on attacking one another or discrediting one another than we do providing services for our people. And that's unresolved trauma in the workplace, and it plays out. And so it's real important so our people that are in our workforce can start identifying how their own trauma has impacted them. And then we support that process by encouraging outside work, but then also working with our clinicians so they become aware of how our own histories and impact the way we navigate our relationships in a professional setting. And, you know, I'm always telling my staff, if we focus on the people, we focus on the people, we begin to heal as a system. as a people. But the fighting amongst each other is real, and it's real prevalent, and it really impedes the services that we can provide for our people. So internalized oppression, and this is a big one. And so we use a lot of theory that's extracted from Western, but really rooted in Indigenous psychology. So we identify theories that really have our value systems, a collectivist approach, and what that looks like. And if they don't fully hold that, we modify these applications of theory in our therapy room. So internalized oppression, right? Sometimes we just don't know. Like I said earlier, we don't know we can grow up and be a doctor. We don't know that we can grow up and be a pilot. We don't know these things. And that falls back into our lateral piece. Not knowing these things isn't intentional, but sometimes our parents, our generations, you know, they weren't aware they could do more. And that's a result of chronic trauma. That's a result of chronic abuse. That's a result of systematic oppression chronically over time. And then we internalize as a people that we're not capable. And so how do we lift that oppression in the therapy room? And how do we bring those gifts and talents to life is really where we focus a lot of our training. And we're going places, and it feels good to be an agency that allows, you know, as natives, our use of English language looks very different. So, you know, even using the word spirituality, using the word love, using the word energy is very far removed from Western training. But allowing that space so your relatives can feel connected to their belief systems is really important. Next slide. And so theoretical, right? Because we have to blend the best of both worlds. We have to look at what are our theories and how did these theories develop and where did they extract these theories from? And all the theories that you have listed on the right-hand side, evidence-based practices, are grounded and rooted in Indigenous psychology. And were taken from our practices and our models of care. And so we modify these versions, right? And we adapt them, and they're evidence-based, and we change language. We, you know, for developing distraction plans for our people or self-soothing plans, those are all based on our relatives' experience, their background, things that they utilized when they were mindful when they were young to help them feel safe and secure, and really trying to work with our relatives on gaining self-regulation. We have high prevalence rates of depression and anxiety across the nation, and that's a direct result of trauma. And so really teaching our clinicians, we can't always jump right into the trauma because they have no tools at this time to deal with the trauma and the experience that they've endured for years. And their coping mechanisms right now are alcohol and drug use. And so jumping into trauma, we can re-traumatize and we can set up relapse, and it's triggering. Next slide, please. Okay, so really working with our clinical staff on stabilizing our client, right? How can we work with a client who comes in to therapy because they've had all this historical trauma, but they have no basic needs met? So they lack housing, they lack food, they lack shelter, they lack clothing. But then we want to work on their trauma. We can't even get them grounded into the room. And if we do, it's a potential for relapse because we're triggering all the stuff that led to their addiction. And so really working with the clinical staff on, because we have clinicians who work from EMDR, trauma-informed care, and other forms of intense trauma-informed care, not jumping into the trauma before we've given them the tools so they can survive and work through that piece. And so basic needs, total integrated care here. I have clients who come in, we're checking on their housing, I'm doing Teams. Can we do a warm handoff right after this therapy session? Can I get an update on where they're at with their housing? Can I get an update on where we're at with securing their social security card, their ID, those kind of things? And we get live updates. Care coordination is a big part of that piece that we do in therapy here. And that's because we are trying to meet their basic needs. And in therapy and early on therapy, we're doing basic skills building. Because I'm always teaching the clinicians and training the clinicians, there's two things that we need. Our goals in therapy are self-regulation and autonomy. And if we can accomplish self-regulation, we can move into trauma work, right? And sometimes that takes a little longer with our relatives based on their buy-in, based on their support system. So the uploading of teaching skills building is a practice that they have to take. This we come to, and talk therapy, don't get me wrong, is beneficial, and people can come and talk about what they're experiencing, but until they can integrate behavioral changes in their everyday life and practice those based on their belief systems and grounding techniques, until they practice those and integrate those and begin learning self-regulation, we can't enter into the trauma. Because they have no skills, coping skills to deal with the trauma. So those are the two things that we really focus on. So we're DBT intensive, upfront, modified version to incorporate all our Indigenous practices and beliefs. And our clients integrate those grounding techniques and those things that they do in their morning practices. So having that knowledge base is part of being trauma informed. Just working on the trauma is truly negligent and perpetuates and exacerbates all symptoms. Next slide, please. Oh, so normally I'm just the talking head. And so I try to really limit and shorten my presentation, knowing that I only had 45 minutes and then we would open it up for questions, but definitely I welcome questions. So at our program here, because we are a training program, but we also have providers that are permanent staff, but we started a training program in 2017. And we just really picked up and are doing our whole training module with existing practitioners and our students that are coming from UW and developing clinicians that can really understand what it means to live in a systematic oppression system, and how do we get our needs met, and how do we learn self-regulation, and how do we gain confidence in navigating this world. So then we can start understanding that we have resiliency like nobody, right? But how can we navigate that in the world until we reach other goals? And I always describe this as like, I think I can. And I have clinicians come all the time. Well, they were saying they were going to do this. They were saying they were going to do that, but then they did nothing, right? Because when you come from chronic trauma, you have spurts, we call them, like just a glimpse of optimism, and then it's gone quickly, right? So as many years as it took us to condition and internalize that oppression through our behavioral changes, that's going to lift, but that takes time as well. And so really working closely with them on what are their daily commitments and the cognitive piece as well, until they can connect that with the emotional piece that generally drives their presenting behaviors every day, and the emotional piece that often limits them, paralyzes them from moving forward, and teaching them that on these days we have our daily commitments and we get up and we do our practices, even if we don't feel like doing them. And eventually, if we get in these patterns, and we're learning self-regulation, we're learning delayed gratification, we're learning a lot of tools that are associated with how we feel about ourselves. And most importantly, we're learning like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I can do all these things. I'm gifted, I'm talented, I'm as smart as everyone, I'm smarter than everyone. And then moving in a way that where they identify, you know, that I can do this and I can stabilize my life. So I'll open it up for questions and stop talking. If there's any questions, this was just a real generic overview because of time.
Dr. Gallagher, thank you for sharing your knowledge on creating a trauma-informed healthcare system that is influenced by Indigenous practices. I think it is important to recognize that although not all individuals may believe in a certain service or practice, it ultimately comes down to what the relative believes in. The relative must believe in the service for the services to be effective. So thank you. Thank you to both of our presenters. Are there any questions or comments for either of the presenters today? Tiffany, are they, the participants able to unmute themselves?
Yeah, everybody should be able to select unmute over their participant name if they open up the participant chat box. And there's also a few questions in the chat box, Tempest.
It looks like we have a few individuals unmuted. If you have a question, feel free to ask it now.
I have both a question and a comment. That this program seems very similar to a chaplaincy training that I did, a residency in a hospital in Houston, Texas. And I'm very interested in learning more about it and how to participate on a volunteer basis, perhaps, and getting more training. How would I do that?
So currently, with everything going on with COVID, we are not taking on participants for training components, but recently we sold our residential Thunderbird. And so we always, when we have our residential settings up, and these trainings are both in outpatient and these trainings are both in residential, because we like the gamut of care, so transitioning our clients all the way through. So that would be a thing when our residential is up and running again. We do allow people to come into the trainings, those kind of things, so they can participate and learn more, and also conduct volunteer work.
So can I get on an email list? Do you guys have an email list that we can subscribe to?
Not that I know of, but we have a website and you can write us and give us your information. And there's a website so the community can give us feedback and those kind of things. And then we can also provide you independently updates on when that reopening of our residential and what the time frame is for that.
Thank you very much. This really spoke to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Amanda, were you going to say something?
This has been, I was going to ask, what is that website?
So it's www.sihb.org. And we can have Tempest send out some information to the participants in regards to finding out more information. But if you go to our website, you'll learn more about our program.
One question from the chat box reads, how can those of us from outside organizations best collaborate with SIHB?
So one of the things that would be to email us collectively and and see what that looks like. So I do a lot of collaboration. You know, I've worked, I've only been back in the area for about 4 years, but I do stay in close contact with Colville and also Tulalip. And, you know, we are here at Seattle Indian Health Board, and that's one of our primary goals is to extend services and information to neighboring tribes on how we do things. And then also tribes and other, you know, because I'm Klamath, I also collaborate with some Klamath tribes on what we're doing here at Seattle Indian Health Board. So it's just a matter of making the connection and learning that people want to learn more and people are interested. You know, people write and they say, like, what are you guys doing for the COVID? What are you guys doing in behavioral health? And we disseminate that, our phase plans out to tribes. And, you know, we're here to help all Native people and to support all our relatives.
Thank you. We had another question. Does the Seattle Indian Health Board work with the Northwest Washington Indian Health Board in any way?
No, I don't personally, but I'm sure they do. You know, at the higher levels, one of the things I've been back in this position since November, but I've been contracting with pretty much Seattle Indian Health Board since 2017, since my return to the West Coast. And so right now, stabilizing their programs internally, and then also trying to navigate with the tribes. My social networking is kind of limited until there's stability within, but it's growing quickly and it's growing. And watching the integration and even looking at the integration from when I was here as a permanent in 2018 to returning was like, oh my goodness, I was so impressed with the changes that have been made by Esther Lucero and her leadership and cultivating an Indigenous model of care. So we're getting there. And it takes time and it takes a lot of work and effort and it takes a lot of training. And it takes a lot of selection. So you select people, they come on board, they may or may not buy into the philosophy here at Seattle Indian Health Board. And oftentimes Western training interferes with that ability to be open and considering other approaches that may be more effective for our First Nation people. So, you know, people come and sometimes people go. And that's kind of part of that process of finding the perfect fits and aligning with the philosophy here at Seattle Indian Health Board.
I will add that when opportunities come up for partnership, that we do welcome those. And as far as our traditional medicine work, we've collaborated with the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board for things like the planning of the tribal food sovereignty gathering that was held last year. And in other initiatives that come up. Also, our governmental affairs officer is highly involved in various groups, to include the Northwest affiliated tribes and other places where people come together and discuss policy or just kind of what's going on in Indian country. We're always welcome to building partnerships and to figure out what things we can collaborate on with. So if you are ever, well, you can also contact Esther Lucero because she's wonderful at figuring out kind of where the points of connection are in the initiatives that we're involved in at the organizational level. So I just want to hear that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Tempest, this is Liz. And I wonder, as maybe a follow-up step, if I'm correct, it looks like Barb Juarez jumped off the call, but it might be helpful for us to send out some information about the Northwest Washington Indian Health Board. I think for the 8 tribes in our region, they have been moving to include all 8 of the tribes on their board, and maybe it's one possible follow-up for a next webinar to put in your queue of having Barb be able to talk about some of the work that they're leading and focused on some of the things that are happening here in the region.
Thank you, Liz. I will make note of that. Annette, we had another question for you. Whoops. What is the most fulfilling part of your role?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's so many ways to answer that question. We just held our division team meeting before I came into this meeting. And one of the things that I was expressing to our team is that, we are privileged to be able to sit with our relatives in whatever state they're presenting with at the time, and to be able to sit with them and be of support to them and listen to their story, and to be able to help them figure out how they want to address their health and wellness needs. So and being able to be in a position where we can actually look at bringing people together to participate and carry out the cultural, it's a paradigm shift across our organization, from having a siloed approach and placing, long ago, I remember the days when traditional medicine was seen as just kind of something that was out there, that was non-essential. And then I've seen over the course of time how the view and the value of our traditional ways is held in high esteem, and to be part of the process with all of our team members and our relatives that we serve. Probably that's the most valuable thing that I carry with me each and every day when I come here.
Thank you, Annette. Are there any other questions for either of our presenters today? Comments?
I would like to add that I, really appreciate our leadership in terms of the notion that going back to knowing what our people need and understanding how to best fit that need, and always advocating for the things that, are going to be helpful for our relatives. And examples of this are seen on a daily basis. And, whether we're advocating for the care of those that we serve to external agencies, or whether we're, looking at how we can um, uh, move the bar from other entities so that there's an increase in understanding that we're going to drive our service delivery system in a way that is meaningful for us. And while we understand that there are, requirements and guidelines and among accreditation bodies or among health insurance providers and that their systems, our bottom line is that we are always going to first look at what is beneficial for us in serving our people, because we have the expertise in doing that. And so we're always advocating for that. And even as, I sit in the circles of folks who are talking about how we can get reimbursed for traditional medicine services and moving in that direction, really being able to define what that looks like for us and what it is that we will be able to the level that we will be able to share information or choose to keep information that we feel is protected within our organization. So having those kinds of conversations is really meaningful. Thank you.
Tempest?
Yes.
I would like to the comment as well.
Okay.
And so, like historically, working in multiple agencies, multiple tribal agencies, working across the nation, working in 4 different states within the last 12 years, finding a home at Seattle Indian Health Board, and this is my home. And when I say this, is because it is safe to be Native. It is safe to be practicing as a Native practitioner, as a behavioral health division director, and understanding, yes, we have licensing agencies. Yes, we have governing agencies and funding agencies and accreditation agencies, but truly having a executive leadership team and a leadership team who knows how to navigate around those so we can provide culturally competent services to our relatives is amazing, and I've never experienced it. And so it is safe to be Native here. It is safe to provide practices in a Native way. It is safe to use Native language and use the word spirituality and use the word love and use the word that clinically in other settings is really like, whoa, what did you just say, So really having that language and use of language and an understanding of how do we navigate both worlds in a way that we can provide the best practices for our people. So honored to be here, honored to, working under Annette and getting supervision from her in different aspects is amazing. Working under Esther and Abigail and our leadership team on how do we create a space for Indigenous people to actually heal from trauma. So that's my reward. And my daily reward is the immediate gratification, and I'm constantly humbled by our relatives when I'm doing direct practice of their perseverance and their ability to navigate everything that's coming on at them on a daily basis. Brings me that gratitude, because I'm humbled by what they're experiencing, and they're still here, and they're still presenting, and they're still trying to improve their lives. And, you know, so it moves me from that space of getting into a space where I feel sorry for myself. So every morning when I drive to work, I feel so blessed to be here serving my people. So yeah, and that's because we're cultivating that within our culture, within our services, and within our practices, and within not just what we're giving to relatives, but how we treat one another too as a team, a family here at Seattle Indian Health Board.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Gallagher. My name is Vanessa Diaz, and I work for Sound ACH. I'm also a member of the Samish Indian Nation in Anacortes. And I just want to thank you and Annette for sharing that, especially what you just said about providing a safe space for our relatives and our people. My background before Sound ACH was in the medical field, and they were oftentimes I would work in a position where it was not necessarily a safe space for our Native people to come, and they would be scared or quiet and not ask the appropriate questions for their health due to just not feeling safe, unable to speak in the environment where they were maybe not as welcome to open up, or felt, you know, whatever their feelings were wrapped around that. So just thank you for both of you and everybody doing the work to provide a safe space for our people, because it's important, and the historical traumas behind being able to speak and feel comfortable to say, I don't feel safe, or why is this happening to me in a medical, because oftentimes for anybody, you know, when you're seeing a doctor, whether it's a mental health provider or a medical doctor, and you know, for your body, your person, it's scary, and you're not there because things are going right. You're 90% of the times you're there because things are not going right, and offering a space for people to speak their truth and ask questions and feel safe is priceless. So thank you. I raise my hands up to you. Thank you, Dr. Gallagher and Annette.
Thank you.
We had an additional question and comment asking if the deck will be available as a PDF after. The presentation will be available on our YouTube channel once it's updated, and we can send out the slide deck with Dr. Gallagher and Annette's permission. And then the comment was, I realize I need to learn a lot more about lateral and internalized depression, and I would love to refer back to the presentation to begin that work. And then we had another comment. I found the webinar very informational. Thank you. I raise my hands in gratitude to the experts who presented today. With that being said, Liz, do you want to, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to add today?
Probably just joining in the gratitude that you just expressed from others. You know, we have been on now an almost 2-year tribal and equity learning journey with our staff, our board, and the clinical and community partners that work with us here in the North Sound region. And you know, we are incredibly blessed because there's so much leadership and innovation that's being shared from the 8 tribes that are here. And so hearing more of what's happening out of the Seattle Indian Health Board is really just like more fantastic information that's shared where I don't know if I know where we are on this learning journey, whether I can even say we're midstream or still at the early stages, but you know, we've just been really blessed by the kind of leadership that our teams and our partners are getting to hear from. So just thank you very much for taking the time and sharing the information that you had with us today.